Hello. This video has been prepared to help you install Python and PyCharm. So a little background into the installation process. In order for you to program your solutions in Python, you need to have the Python language installed on your computer. Now, if you're running a Macintosh computer, Mac operating systems come pre-installed with a version of Python, but unfortunately, it's not the version of Python you're going to be using for this class. The version of Python that you will likely have on your machine is a version of Python 2.x, 2.2, 2.4, 2.6. Unfortunately, that's not going to be good for this class. So both PC and Mac users need to have at least version 3.x installed on the machine. When Python updated to version 3 of the programming language, there were significant updates made. And it's one of the few times in software history that a language was not downward compatible. Typically, when language is updated, it'll run the old code, but older programs cannot take advantage of the new features of the programming language. In the case of Python, when they went to version 3.x of the software, they basically broke all ties with version 2.x in terms of software. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to install two things. One is we have to install Python onto the computer. The next thing we have to do is install a program called PyCharm. Now, PyCharm is referred to as an IDE, or an integrated development environment. What an integrated development environment means is that, as the first word, integrated, what PyCharm does is it integrates a number of different tools that are available to programmers to help make the programming process easier. For instance, when you write a programming solution, if you're writing a Python solution, you typically have to write your code in something referred to as a text editor, not Word. For PC users, typically a text editor you may be familiar with is something called Notepad. For Apple users, there's a native text editor built into the operating system, but other more popular text editors for the Mac operating system are things like Text Wrangler. And what a text editor is a piece of software that it just, as you type your source code, it doesn't add any type of additions, any enhancements to the text like bolding, underlining, italics. That's typically what you would see in a word processor. So in order for the code to be processed correctly, it has to be pure data, and that's what the text editor allows you to do. But instead of actually having to write your code in a text editor, then take the text file and supply it to the programming language for execution. And if you have a problem, you have to try to diagnose the problem yourself. What the IDE, in this case PyCharm, will do, it gives the programmer a collection of tools that allows you to go through the diagnostic process, the execution process, the solution creation process a lot easier. So this is a two-step process. The good news is that once we get done with this process, it doesn't have to be repeated. So it is very important that we get through this the right way the first time, because due to the speed of the class, you want to make sure you have software that's actually working. Okay, so if you look at my screen, I actually have two tabs open. One is the tab, oh, by the way, the instructions on how to do this are in the lesson in week 1. And so you can get through that specifically, and I'm looking at my notes. Module C is the module that's designed for installing Python and PyCharm. So if you want to refer to the installation notes, because I did a lot of screen captures, is 15 pages plus long. So I'm putting this video together to try to actually show you that the process isn't all that bad. It's just that to have to speak it and take a look at all those images, those screen captures, it really does make for a long document. So it's not that difficult. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to download Python, the current version of Python. Again, for Mac users, please do not get lulled into this place of of security, that you've spoken to some of your friends, programmers who said, no, you don't have to install Python because Python's already on the machine. You need to install Python. So let's go through the process. So when you get to the Python website, and the address is here, www.python.org. Once you get there, the software on the website is intelligent enough to know what you need on your machine in terms of whether it be Windows or Mac operating system. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on, hover over the Downloads button, and you'll notice that off on the right-hand side, there is a pop-up that shows that we have the current version that's been released is version 3.6.5. So if you've already been doing Python programming and you have any version of version 3 on your computer, then you really don't have to worry about reinstalling it. If you're one of those individuals who wants to have the latest and greatest, go ahead and download the latest version of Python. And as of today, which is we're in May, the current version of Python is 3.6.5. Again, don't panic if you don't have the absolute latest copy, because if you don't have the latest copy, but it's version 3 point anything, you should be fine. Okay, so let's go back and let's start to download. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start downloading. And if you'll notice, I'm doing this execution, this installation process. I'm using the Google Chrome browser. And if you're familiar with Google Chrome, anytime you try to download a particular piece of software, it actually shows as an instance on the lower left-hand corner of the browser. So I have my Python executable downloaded to the computer, my computer already. I'm running a PC running Windows 7. So instead of downloading the next executable, which is for PyCharm, let's go ahead and install Python as the programming language first. There's a couple of options that I want you to take a look at. That all this information, if you prefer to just read through it and go through it at your own pace, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and click on the icon for Python 3.6.5, and the first thing that I'm getting is, do you want to run this file? It's a slightly different set of screens when dealing with the Mac, but it's basically the same. And if you've ever installed software on your Mac computer before, certainly you understand what this process is. If you run into a problem with installation, the tech support at the university is available for you. They will help you in terms of installation. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Run. And so let's take a look at a couple of things here. When you try to install this version, it is going to basically select all the things that it knows that it needs. Now, depending on the type of computer you have, this line right here where it says install Python 3.6.5, 32, it might be 64-bit depending on the computer that you have, depending on how it's configured, depending on the processor, depending on the operating system. But regardless, whatever it chooses is fine. Whatever it understands what you need. Now, the one thing that I did want to share with you is if you take a look down here at these options, there is one check that I need you to pay particular attention to, and that's right here. Add Python 3.6 to path. What that's going to do, it's going to place a reference to the Python programming language in some key operating system files, so that when you install PyCharm, or if you're ever in any portion of your computer and you want to execute a Python program, you should be able to without a problem. Okay, so I'm going to put a check mark here near next to the option for Add Python 3.6 to path, and then I'm going to go ahead and choose Install Now. Now, you may get a couple of more permission windows. In this particular case, it says, do you want to allow the following program to make changes to your computer? My computer is sensing that there's an executable file, in this case Python, that's trying to do something to my computer, and that's fine. Go ahead and choose yes. And this is basically like a waiting game. You're basically babysitting the application. Once it takes the time to go through and do what it needs to do, it'll go through and install the software on the computer. Just as a quick technical note, 32-bit, 64-bit, for the kinds of programs we'll be creating in the CS151 class, either version is going to be fine. There isn't anything so large that it really requires some heavy-duty computing capability of a 64-bit version of the program. If it chooses to install the 64-bit version, that's fine. Just let it go through, and so it can take advantage of the processor's 64-bit capability. Okay, so quick review. Python is the programming language that we're going to be using throughout the semester. And once this is done, we're going to install PyCharm, which is the integrated development environment. PyCharm needs to have an operating system in order to execute your programming code. Notice I said execute. If you do not install Python on a computer, you can still use PyCharm. You can write your code. You can take a look and see exactly what it's going to do if you could execute it, but you won't be able to execute it. It needs to have a programming language interpreter in order to execute the code. Okay, so once we get this process done, we'll go to the next process in terms of installing PyCharm. So it looks like this is almost done. Once it's finished up, we'll go through the process of installing PyCharm. Just as a quick note, there is in Module C, after you install Python and PyCharm, there'll be a few questions that you'll need to answer in order for you to move forward. But we also have, in the same module, you should see that there is a lab activity that you need to complete. And that lab activity is Introduction to Programming. I'm just letting you know up front that that Introduction to Programming activity is a team project, and it's going to ask you to go into PyCharm, write a program. I'll tell you exactly what you need to write. I'm not expecting you to understand exactly what it is that you're going to be typing. I just want to make sure you understand how to deal with actually entering code into PyCharm. Okay, so that little quick commercial break is over, and it looks like we have success in dealing with Python. I'm going to go ahead and click on close, and that's it for Python. Now what we're going to do is, since we have Python installed, 3.6.2, we're going to move on to PyCharm. Okay, so if you haven't done so already, you want to navigate your web browser to jetbrains.com. This particular organization is over, I believe it's Norway. And so I say that not to talk about some trivia, although that is kind of a neat trivia point. PyCharm, it was developed in the Scandinavias, and as such, when you try to do certain things within that particular program, you may find that you say, well, what is an A4 size piece of paper if you try to print something? Well, since it was developed in Norway, you have to specifically tell PyCharm that you want to print, if you're planning on printing anything from PyCharm, using US dimensions in terms of paper, which is 8.5 by 11, not A4. A4 is a typical default over in Europe. So with that in mind, let's go to, once you navigate over to JetBrains, you hover over Tools, and when you do, you have a collection of options that are available. And if you take a look at that first column, about 64.9% down that column, you'll see PyCharm. So I'm just going to hover over it so you can see what I'm doing. And if you notice to the left, that is the default icon for PyCharm. And so when you click on it, it'll navigate to the PyCharm installation page. Okay. Now, one of the wonderful things about PyCharm is the organization JetBrains makes PyCharm available free of charge, which This program is an amazing program. It's incredibly powerful. It's free of charge. Great idea. The hope is that once you become a professional and if you're doing programming for a living, hopefully you will purchase the professional version of PyCharm, which allows you to do much more than the basic version, which we'll be using. But don't make any mistakes. The what they call the community edition is certainly capable of a number of things. It's a very, very powerful application program. So now that we're here, we're going to go ahead and click on Download Now. And this is what I was sharing with you earlier. You have two options. The professional version, which is it's a free trial, but you'll eventually have to pay the piper and put up some money. Depending if you're coming in here with a Windows-based machine or a Mac-based machine, you'll notice that it will select which version to allow you to download. Since I'm running this on a Windows-based machine, it's already pre-selected Windows. But if you take a look at the instructions that I provided in terms of the installation guide, we're going to be using the Community Edition, which is the black button where it says Lightweight IDE for Python and Scientific Development. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Download. Now, this particular program is a little bit large. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you can see the numbers on my screen. The download is 183 megabytes, which it's not huge, but it's a lot bigger than Python. So at this point, it's in the process of downloading. It's about halfway done. Just be a little patient because it does take a little bit of time. Now, you don't have to put any information in here. If you want to get some information from JetBrains about any updates in terms of version changes or any updates as far as the organization with PyCharm, feel free to put your email address in, but you really don't have to. So we're close to having this being done, and it's done. Okay, so once I get the visual, there we go, the acknowledgement that we can install, I'm going to start the installation process. Again, in Google Chrome, in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see this application available. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the application, and it's asking me if I want to run the file. I'm going to go ahead and choose Run. And for right now, I don't need to have this web browser opened up any longer. I'm just going to minimize it. So let me start this process and then minimize. Welcome to the PyCharm Community Edition setup. I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. Now, you don't have to change anything here. What PyCharm is doing, it's picking the default location for, or the default parameters for the application. So whatever it chooses, go ahead and go with it. This happens to be the 2018 version 1.3. That's the most current version of PyCharm. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Next. Now, this is something that is actually in the installation guide, but one of the things that I'm going to suggest that you do is if you're running the Windows and if you're running the Mac version, what I would like you to do is go ahead and put a checkbox next to all the options. So I'll explain each one of them. So what we have here, these are the most important, is these are icons that will be placed on the desktop that allows you to easily open PyCharm. So depending on which version of Python is installed on the machine will depend on, we're going to most often be using the 32-bit launcher. If you install the 64-bit launcher, like I said, the kinds of programs we'll be doing and developing in CS151, you really don't have to worry too much about the 64-bit portion, but you can install it anyway. This piece here, create associations. Every file on a computer has two components. One is called the file name, and the other is the file extension. The file name is typically what you would type in to describe what your file is. So if you're writing a paper that deals with programming in Python, and the file name you wanted to put in was, this is the best paper that I've ever written on the Python programming language. That's a file name. Typically, you have a maximum of 255 characters for the file name. The file extension, however, is a little bit different. The operating system typically uses the file extension to associate two pieces with that file. So the file extension is used to determine what icon will be associated with the file. It's also associated with what application to launch to pull that data file in. So the default file extension for all Python programs is .py. So what we're saying here is that we want to associate PyCharm with any file that has a .py extension. So that when we double click on the file with the .py extension, PyCharm will automatically launch. Now, do you have to do this? You're going to save yourself a lot of hassle if you do. Because if you choose not to associate PyCharm with all files that have a .py extension, what the operating system is going to do, it's going to attempt to launch your Python program using what they refer to as a command line version of Python. Your screen will pop up a little black window. It'll execute your program and then disappear. And you'll look at the screen and say, what the heck was that? So by putting this check mark here, it actually associates your Python source code files with PyCharm. So you can actually edit them in PyCharm. This here is an extra collection of software that the PyCharm application would like to download and install onto a machine. And if in fact you have this option, go ahead and choose it. It'll take a little bit longer to install PyCharm on the machine, but I would suggest go ahead and putting a check mark into that little box. I'm going to click on Next. And then in my case, on a Windows-based machine, what most Windows-based programs will do, it'll say, what category would you like me to call this application? And since it was developed by JetBrains, I'm going to leave it as JetBrains, then click on Install. Now, again, this may take a little bit of time. That extra piece that we were just talking about is now being downloaded and it'll be configured onto the machine. Once it's done, the rest of the installation of PyCharm will continue. And then once that's done, we have some general configuration screens, and all I can tell you right now is to make a decision if you want a light background or a dark background, and that's really about it. That's all you really need to worry about in terms of the configuration. Once that's done, I'll show you how to get into PyCharm, and then we'll continue on. And at some point over the course of the next day or so, you'll want to be able to complete that lab activity number 1. Again, lab activity number 1 is designed to be a team-based application or activity. So you'll get a copy of who's partnered with who at some point. And then once that's done, you'll be communicating with your partner so you can put your first Python program together. This may take, like I said, a few moments. Let's see, what else can I tell you about? This is Module C. Module D has you getting into understanding what the difference between computer science and what that has relation to hardware. Since we're running hardware on a computer, it really is a good idea to understand what it is that you're dealing with when you're trying to write your program in terms of the connection between the two. So, okay, but you'll find more about that as you get into your into the remaining modules in the lesson for week 1. But as far as PyCharm is concerned, as you can see from the screen, PyCharm is done. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run PyCharm Community Edition. I'm going to put a check mark next to the little run PyCharm, and then I'm going to choose Finish. And I'm doing this for a reason, because what's going to happen is that the system is going to try to configure the installation process for the first time. Now, if you take a look for a complete installation, most likely this radio button is selected, do not import settings. If it did have a prior installation of PyCharm on the computer, it might have a different radio button selected, but I'm going to go ahead and choose do not import settings. I'm going to click OK. And at this point, recall about 3 or 4 minutes ago, I was saying, make a determination and make a decision as to whether or not you want to have the light background or a dark background. So some of you, you like to have a dark background with the lettering on top of the dark background. I configure my machine in this format. Okay, so I have a light background with darker letters. To me, I can see this a little bit easier. Some of the colors that are available with the dark background aren't exactly as clear to me. It's a matter of personal preference. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the light background. And at this point, that's really it. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scoot this up a little bit. You can go through the next remaining pieces, but I really don't think you need to. I'm going to go ahead and skip remaining. But let me just go through the next, and so I can show you. None of these, we're not going to have any plugins. Nothing you have to install here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and choose Start Using PyCharm. So this is the screen that you would typically see. And that's about it. So we're now ready to start developing our first program. So I'll probably say this about another few hundred times, but creating a Python program in PyCharm is a two-step process. Step number one is to create a new project. Once you create a new project, PyCharm will ask you, where would you like me to put this project? And the second thing is, where is Python? Remember I said before that PyCharm requires a programming language in order for it to do anything. So in the case that we have here, I'm going to have PyCharm. We have to tell PyCharm where Python is. So what I'm going to do is finish this video by just telling you that there is a two-step process. So if in fact you are going to create a new Python program, first step would be to create a new project. You want to give it a name and tell it where it's supposed to be found. It's going to be stored. And then you're going to tell PyCharm where to find Python. Then you can start creating your Python program by creating a Python file and then entering your individual lines of code. When we get into the next video, I'll show you a way that we can do that together.